Blue Jays breaking news. Our daily edition starts now with the most important breaking news and latest updates.
Speed up with us on the Toronto Report and follow the statements that are shaking up the baseball backstage.
Let's start with the money, because that's where this deal actually gets interesting for Jays Nation. Gausman was sitting on the back half of a 5-year, $110 million contract, and his 2026 salary was north of $22 million. By moving him at the deadline as a pure rental, Toronto shed real peril at a moment when the front office desperately needed flexibility heading into the winter. This isn't just about clearing a locker. This is about competitive balance tax math. The Blue Jays have been dancing around the first CBT threshold for 2 straight seasons, and offloading Gausman's remaining salary, even prorated for 2 months, gives Ross Atkins breathing room to maneuver in free agency without triggering escalating tax penalties. Here's the thing insiders are missing when they slap a C- grade on this deal. Rental pitchers at 35 years old with 4.38 ERA don't command elite prospect packages. Full stop. The industry wants to pretend Gausman's underlying FIP of 3.51 means he's still an ace-caliber arm. But if that were true across the board, teams would be lining up with blue-chip prospects instead of A-ball infielders with no power. The reality is Toronto read the market correctly. Velocity is down. The 7-start stretch with 7.27 ERA spooked buyers, and the front office had away reputation against actual offers on the table. Now let's talk depth chart, because this trade doesn't happen in a vacuum. With Gausman gone, John Schneider's rotation math changes immediately. Jose Barrios slides into the unquestioned game 1 roll down the stretch, and that puts even more pressure on his second-half workload after an inconsistent first 4 months. Behind him, you're looking at rotation that leans heavily on internal options. Whoever stretched out in Buffalo becomes must-watch depth. The Blue Jays AAA rotation in Buffalo now becomes the single most important storage unit in this organization for the next 8 weeks. If Toronto is going to hang around the American League East race, or even just protect a wild card spot, someone from that group needs to step up and eat innings like Gausman used to. And that's the real story here. This trade signals the front office might be quietly pivoting from buy to sell adjacent without fully waving the white flag. Moving a rotation piece at the deadline, even a rental, generally means one of 2 things. Either ownership is bracing for a step-back year, or they're clearing salary specifically to reinvest in a different position group this winter. Given the whispers about Toronto's long-term need for bullpen depth and a corner outfield bat, I'd bet on the latter. This looks like a chess move disguised as a throwaway trade. Let's pivot to return, because the Athletics grades, AC for Toronto and A- for Chicago, are going to dominate the discourse, but insiders are focusing on the wrong details. Brett Bateman is a 24-year-old outfielder, slashing .312/.431/.422 in AAA with Iowa. Yes, the power is close to non-existent. 3 homers in 346 plate appearances. But that on-base percentage is not nothing. In today's game, with StatCast measuring plate discipline as heavily as exit velocity, a hitter who controls the strike zone at that level projects as a legitimate table setter or a strong fourth outfielder type at the very least. Keith Law himself conceded Bateman has a path to the majors. That's not scouting depth. That's a role player who can stick. Ty Saltazine is a tougher sell, and nobody in the Blue Jays front office is going to pretend otherwise. 0 home runs and over 700 professional plate appearances is a legitimate red flag, especially when Law is pointing out there's no physical projection left in the swing. But let's put this in context. Middle infield prospects without power still have value as organizational depth, especially guys hitting over .300 in full season ball. Not every prospect needs to be a middle-of-the-order bat. If Saltazine profiles as a glove-first utility infielder who can handle second base and shorten a pinch, that's a big league bench piece, not a bust. Is it a thrilling headline return? No, but rentals rarely are. And anyone expecting a blue-chip return for a 35-year-old with a rising ERA hasn't been paying attention to how the deadline market has shifted the last 3 years. Now, here's where the story gets almost cinematic. Gausman's Cubs debut is lined up for Thursday at Wrigley Field against the very team that just traded him. Toronto flies into Chicago this week for a make-up game, and the baseball gods apparently have a sense of humor. Imagine the Blue Jays lineup: Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, George Springer, staring down the same right-hander who called Toronto home for years, now wearing Cubs pinstripes in his first start with his new club. That's not just a storyline. That's appointment television for both fan bases. Schneider is going to have to prepare a scouting report on a guy his own coaching staff built game plans around for years. And Gausman knows this Blue Jays lineup better than almost any opposing pitcher could. This is a kind of subplot that makes trade deadlines must-watch content, well, beyond the initial transaction. From a lineup construction standpoint, Toronto's offense doesn't change. This was a pitching-only move. But the pressure on the bats just increased. If the rotation takes a step back without Gausman's innings-eating presence, even in his diminished form, then Guerrero, Bichette, and Springer need to produce at an elite offensive level just to keep pace in the brutal AL East. Every OPS point matters more now. Every extra base hit off the bat of Dalton Varsho or Alejandro Kirk, if he's still in the fold, carries more weight when the pitching staff is thinner than it was 48 hours ago. Let's also address the noise around grades from national writers. Andy McCullough and Stephen J. Nesbitt both hammered Toronto for. They're calling a light return, and look, they're not wrong that the industry expected more. But grades issued 24 hours after a trade rarely age well. Remember when analysts trashed certain rental deals in years past, only to watch the throw-in prospect become a legitimate big leaguer 2 seasons later? Bateman's on-base skills alone make this a bet worth monitoring. And player development departments have turned far less impressive foundations into everyday contributors. The bigger question Blue Jays Nation should be asking isn't, did we get enough for Gausman? It's, what does this trade tell us about what a front office sees as roster heading into 2027? If Atkins is clearing salary at the deadline instead of adding, that is a signal about payroll allocation for next winter, potentially freeing up dollars for a corner outfield addition, bullpen reinforcement, or an extension for one of the young cornerstone position players before they hit free agency. Every trade at the deadline is as much about next year's spreadsheet as it is about this year's standings. So while the industry grades this trade as a loss for Toronto today, the long-term view is far more nuanced. You're getting a projectable on-base bat in Bateman, organizational infield depth in Saltazine, and, most importantly, payroll flexibility that could shape this roster's next major move. Gausman heading to Chicago closes one chapter, but it potentially opens a door for Toronto to be aggressive in free agency once the calendar flips. Keep your eyes on Thursday at Wrigley. Gausman, facing his former team, is going to be one of the most talked about starts of the entire stretch run. And if you want the deepest breakdowns on every Blue Jays transaction, roster move, and payroll shift as the season winds down, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and you've got that notification bell turned on. Drop your grade on this trade in the comments. Did Toronto sell too low? Or is this front office playing a longer game than anyone realizes? Let's talk about it below.